Auctioneer's gavel slammed down, the sound echoing in the cavernous hall like a death knell. I watched, frozen, as my brother, Ethan, smirked, basking in the self-satisfied glow of victory. The Harper family, our family, had just secured the deal of a lifetime, the acquisition of Viridian, a fashion empire worth tens of millions. Except it wasn't our asterisk family celebrating. It was them. They stood there, Ethan, my parents, their faces lit with a triumph that felt like a physical blow. They looked at me, not with love, not with pride, but with a cold, dismissive amusement that chilled me to the bone. My name is Layla, and in that moment, surrounded by the opulent trappings of wealth, I felt utterly and completely alone. If you have a brother or sister, subscribe now and swear you'll always have their back, no matter what. The sting of betrayal wasn't new, but the sheer audacity of it, the public humiliation, was a fresh wound. It all started with Viridian. My grandfather, the founder of our family fortune, had always dreamed of owning the fashion chain. It was his white whale, the one deal that eluded him until the day he passed. He instilled that dream in me, spending countless hours teaching me the intricacies of the fashion industry, grooming me to take the reins of the family business. I poured my heart and soul into learning everything I could, working tirelessly, sacrificing everything to prove myself worthy. I had even presented the winning strategy to the family that would let us acquire Viridian, earning smiles all around, or so I thought. The auction itself was a spectacle, a gathering of the city's elite, all vying for a piece of Viridian's coveted brand. I sat in the back, ostensibly there to support my family, but in reality, I was there because I believed in the plan, my asterisk plan, and I wanted to see it through. Ethan took the lead, his voice booming with confidence as he placed bid after bid, driving the price higher and higher. My parents sat beside him, nodding their approval, their eyes gleaming with avarice. But then disaster struck. A rival bidder, a shadowy conglomerate from overseas, entered the fray, their deep pockets threatening to snatch Viridian away from us. Ethan faltered, his confidence wavering. He turned to my parents, his face etched with panic. That was when my father rose, cleared his throat, and addressed the crowd. He announced that due to unforeseen circumstances, the Harper family was withdrawing from the bidding. The room gasped. Ethan looked stricken. I was confused. But then my father's gaze landed on me, a cruel smile twisting his lips. Unfortunately, he said, his voice dripping with disdain, we discovered that a certain family member has been siphoning funds from the company. We simply can't afford to overextend ourselves. The air in the room seemed to thicken, the whispers of the crowd swirling around me like a venomous fog. Ethan seized the opportunity, joining in the charade. Yes, he added, his voice laced with mockery, Layla here thought she could play us all for fools. Turns out, she's nothing more than a broke idiot who belongs cleaning floors, not running a business. The laughter that followed was like 1,000 tiny knives, each one piercing my skin. My parents joined in, their faces contorted with a mirth that was anything but familial. I wanted to disappear, to vanish into the floorboards, but I forced myself to remain seated, my face an impassive mask. Inside, however, my heart was shattering. The accusation was, of course, a complete fabrication. I had never stolen a single penny from the company. In fact, I had poured my own savings into it, working without pay for years, all for the sake of the family business. But they didn't care about the truth. They had found a convenient scapegoat, someone to blame for their own financial miscalculations. They had chosen to sacrifice me, publicly and humiliatingly, to save their own reputations. The humiliation stung, but underneath the pain, a cold resolve began to take root. They thought they had broken me. They thought they had silenced me. But they were wrong. They had merely awakened a sleeping giant, a force that would stop at nothing to reclaim what was rightfully mine. The auction continued, but I barely registered the proceedings. My mind was already racing, formulating a plan, a strategy that would turn their triumph into ashes. They would learn that betraying me was the biggest mistake they had ever made. The person I trusted most was one of them, my own mother. I'd always thought she was different, that deep down she cared. The drive home was a blur, the city lights mocking my pain. Each skyscraper seemed to whisper accusations, each passing car a reminder of my public shamming. I replayed the auction in my mind, Ethan's smug face, my father's cruel words, my mother's. Nothing. That was the worst part, the emptiness in her eyes. Back at the family mansion, the silence was deafening. The opulent decor, once a symbol of our success, now felt like prison bars, trapping me in a gilded cage of lies and deceit. I went straight to my room, collapsing onto the bed, the weight of betrayal pressing down on me. Sleep evaded me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, heard their laughter. The accusation, the theft, it was so brazen, so unfounded. I tossed and turned, my mind racing, trying to make sense of it all. Why? What had I done to deserve this? Was it simply greed, a power play, or was there something more sinister at play? The night wore on, each hour amplifying my despair. I knew I couldn't let them get away with this. I couldn't let them destroy my reputation, my future, everything I had worked for. But how could I fight back against such powerful enemies, against my own family? The next morning, I confronted my parents. I walked into the breakfast room, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and disbelief. How could you do that to me? I asked, my eyes searching theirs for any sign of remorse. How could you lie like that, accuse me of stealing? In front of everyone, my father merely shrugged, his face devoid of emotion. We did what was necessary, he said, his voice cold and dismissive. You were becoming a liability, you were getting in the way. My mother remained silent, her gaze fixed on her plate, her expression unreadable. A liability, I repeated, my voice rising in disbelief. I dedicated my life to this company, I sacrificed everything for this family. And we appreciate your efforts, my father said, his tone condescending. But it's time for you to move on. We'll give you a small severance package, enough to start over somewhere else. Severance package, that was it. After years of dedication, after pouring my heart and soul into the family business, they were offering me a pittance and telling me to disappear. The injustice of it all was overwhelming. I refused to accept their offer. I told them I would fight them, that I would expose their lies, that I would clear my name. They simply laughed. Who are you going to tell? Ethan sneered, joining the conversation. No one will believe you, you're just a disgraced thief, your word means nothing. They were right. They controlled the narrative. They had the money, the power, the connections. Who would believe a penniless outcast against the mighty Harper family? But I refused to be deterred. I spent the next few weeks trying to gather evidence to prove my innocence. I scoured financial records, looking for any trace of the supposed theft. I contacted former colleagues, hoping to find someone who would vouch for my character. But everywhere I turned, I hit a dead end. My parents had covered their tracks well. They had fabricated evidence, intimidated witnesses, and effectively erased me from the company's history. The more I dug, the more isolated I became. My friends, fearing retribution from my parents, distanced themselves from me. My phone stopped ringing. My emails went unanswered. I was alone, fighting a battle that seemed increasingly unwinnable. Despair began to creep in, threatening to consume me. Sleepless nights turned into endless days of anxiety and frustration. I lost weight, my clothes hanging loosely on my frame. I stared at myself in the mirror, barely recognizing the gaunt, haunted face staring back. Was this it? Was this how my story ended? Broken, defeated, and alone. But then, a flicker of defiance ignited within me. I refused to let them win. I refused to let them destroy me. I would find a way to fight back, even if it meant resorting to unconventional methods. I started documenting everything. Every conversation, every email, every interaction with my family. I knew that if I couldn't prove my innocence through traditional means, I would have to find another way to expose their lies. And that's when I remembered something my grandfather had always told me. Every empire has a weakness, Layla. Find it and you can bring it all crashing down. I just had to figure out what that weakness was. The weight of their betrayal pressed down, suffocating me. I was alone, truly alone. The mansion felt like a mausoleum, each room echoing with the ghosts of happier times, memories now tainted by their treachery. One evening, I found myself standing on the balcony, the city lights blurring through my tears. The wind howled, mirroring the storm inside me. I thought about ending it all, about simply letting go. The thought was a dark comfort, a release from the pain. But then I saw my reflection in the glass door, a broken, defeated woman, and something inside me snapped. No, I wouldn't let them win. I wouldn't let them destroy me. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me give up. I stepped back from the edge, my heart pounding with a newfound resolve. The tears still flowed, but they were now tears of anger, of determination. I would fight back. I would reclaim my life. I would make them pay for what they had done. That night, I started to plan. I spent hours poring over documents, searching for any weakness, any vulnerability that I could exploit. I researched their business dealings, their personal lives, their secrets. I knew it wouldn't be easy. They were powerful, ruthless, and they had everything to lose. But I was resourceful, determined, and I had nothing left to lose. The first step was to gather information. I needed to understand their motivations, their strategies, their weaknesses. I started by reaching out to old contacts, people who had worked with my family in the past. I knew it was risky. They could easily betray me to my parents, but I had to take the chance. I disguised my voice, used burner phones, and met them in secret locations. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to piece together the puzzle. I learned about their financial troubles, their hidden debts, their illicit affairs. I discovered that my father had been gambling heavily, losing vast sums of money. I found out that Ethan had been embezzling funds from the company to finance his lavish lifestyle, and I uncovered a secret that would shatter my world. My mother, the woman I had always trusted, had been working against me for years. She had been feeding information to my father and Ethan, undermining my efforts, sabotaging my plans. She had never loved me. She had only seen me as a threat, a rival for my father's affection and the family fortune. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. I felt like I had been punched in the gut, winded and gasping for air. How could my own mother betray me like that? The pain was unbearable, but it also fueled my determination. If she could be so cruel, so heartless, then I had no choice but to fight back with equal force. I knew I couldn't confront them directly. They would deny everything, twist the truth, and turn everyone against me. I needed to find a way to expose them publicly to reveal their lies to the world. That's when I remembered Veridian, my grandfather's dream, the fashion empire that had been the catalyst for my downfall. It was their obsession, their ultimate prize, and it was also their biggest weakness. I started digging into Veridian's finances, searching for any irregularities, any signs of wrongdoing. I spent weeks poring over spreadsheets, analyzing data, and following leads. It was a grueling process, but I refused to give up. I knew that somewhere in those numbers there was a clue, a piece of evidence that would unravel their entire scheme. And then, one night, I found it. A hidden transaction, a series of shell companies, a complex web of deceit that led directly back to my parents and Ethan. They had used company funds to bribe government officials, manipulate stock prices, and launder money. They had turned Veridian into a vehicle for their own greed and corruption. The evidence was irrefutable. It was the smoking gun I needed to bring them down. I knew that exposing them would be risky. They would fight back with everything they had. But I was no longer afraid. I had nothing left to lose. I was ready to unleash my revenge. The plan was simple. I would gather all the evidence I had collected and present it to the authorities, to the media, to anyone who would listen. I would expose their crimes, reveal their lies, and bring them to justice. I knew it wouldn't be easy. They would try to silence me, to discredit me, to destroy me. But I was prepared for anything. I was no longer the naive, trusting girl they had betrayed. I was a warrior, armed with the truth, and I would not rest until they had paid for what they had done. The darkness that had consumed me began to recede, replaced by a cold, unwavering determination. They had made a grave mistake when they underestimated me. They had thought they could break me, silence me, and erase me from their lives. But they were wrong. I was back and I was ready to fight. The game had just begun. They thought they were untouchable. That was their biggest weakness. The day they betrayed me was the day revenge was born. They broke me. I stayed silent because the plan had begun. I said nothing. They thought I was done, but I was counting every second. The person I trusted most was one of them. I smiled. I played their game, attending family dinners, laughing at their jokes, acting as if nothing had happened. But beneath the surface, I was meticulously gathering evidence. Every conversation, every meeting, every interaction was recorded, both audio and video. I invested in tiny, high-definition cameras disguised as everyday objects: a pen, a button, a smoke detector. I even managed to install a hidden camera in Ethan's office, capturing his every move, every shady deal, every incriminating conversation. I became a master of disguise, a shadow lurking in the background, documenting their every misstep. They suspected nothing, blinded by their arrogance and their belief that they had already won. I consulted with a forensic accountant, a former colleague of my grandfather, who helped me trace the flow of funds, uncover the hidden accounts, and expose the paper trail that led directly back to my family. He was initially hesitant, fearing retribution from my parents, but when I showed him the evidence I had gathered, he was horrified. He agreed to help me, working in secret, providing me with the expertise I needed to build an airtight case. I knew I had to be careful. One wrong move, one slip-up, and they would discover my plan and destroy me. I lived in constant fear of being exposed, of having my recordings discovered, of being silenced forever. But I refused to be deterred. I was driven by a burning desire for justice, a relentless determination to reclaim what was rightfully mine. There were close calls. One evening, my mother walked into my room unexpectedly while I was reviewing some of the recordings. I quickly shut down the laptop, pretending to be asleep. She stood there for a moment, staring at me with a strange, unreadable expression. I held my breath, my heart pounding in my chest, fearing that she knew what I was up to. But then she simply turned and left, closing the door behind her. I exhaled slowly, my body trembling with relief. That was a wake-up call. I realized that I couldn't afford to be careless. I needed to be more vigilant, more cautious, more prepared for anything. I moved all my recordings to an encrypted hard drive, hidden in a secret compartment behind a painting in my room. I installed a surveillance system, monitoring every entrance to the house, every movement within the grounds. I even hired a private investigator, a former law enforcement officer, to provide me with security and to help me anticipate my family's next move. The anticipation was almost unbearable. I knew that the day of reckoning was drawing near, that the moment of truth was fast approaching. I could almost taste the victory, the satisfaction of seeing their empire crumble, of watching them face the consequences of their actions. But I also knew that the stakes were incredibly high, that the risks were immense. If I failed, I would lose everything, my reputation, my future, my life. But I was prepared to take that chance. I was ready to gamble everything on this one final, desperate act of revenge. I consulted with a lawyer, a brilliant young woman who specialized in corporate fraud and securities law. I showed her the evidence I had gathered, the recordings, the financial records, the witness statements. She was impressed, but also concerned. She warned me that my family would fight back with everything they had, that they would try to discredit me, to intimidate me, to silence me. But she also assured me that I had a strong case, that if we played our cards right, we could bring them down. We spent weeks preparing the legal documents, building our case, anticipating their defenses. We knew that they would try to portray me as a disgruntled former employee, a vengeful daughter seeking to destroy her family, but we were ready for them. We had evidence to counter every argument, witnesses to refute every lie. The plan was intricate, complex, and fraught with danger. But it was also my only hope. It was the culmination of months of planning, of scheming, of relentless determination. It was the moment when I would finally reclaim my life and exact my revenge. Their biggest weakness. They thought they were untouchable. The exact day they tried to end me, I exposed the truth. They lost everything, I just smiled. Their weakness wasn't just their arrogance. It was their insatiable greed, their desperate need to maintain their image, and their complete underestimation of my intelligence. I had them right where I wanted them. The evidence was damning. The shell corporations, the offshore accounts, the falsified documents, it all painted a clear picture of fraud, embezzlement, and bribery. It was enough to bring their entire empire crashing down, to send them to jail, and to leave them penniless. But I didn't want just justice. I wanted revenge. I wanted them to suffer the way I had suffered, to feel the pain of betrayal, the sting of humiliation, and the weight of despair. So I devised a plan that was as intricate as it was audacious, a plan that would not only expose their crimes, but also destroy their reputations and shatter their family. The first step was to lure them into a false sense of security. I started acting contrite, apologizing for my accusations, and begging for forgiveness. I told them that I had realized the error of my ways, that I had been blinded by anger and resentment, and that I was ready to move on and start a new life. They were skeptical at first, but my feigned remorse and my desperate pleas gradually wore them down. They wanted to believe me, needed to believe me, because my accusations were a threat to everything they had built. I arranged a meeting at the Viridian headquarters, the gleaming skyscraper that was the symbol of their power and success. I knew they would feel safe there, surrounded by their employees, their security, and their illusion of control. I told them that I had gathered all the evidence and that I was ready to hand it over to them, to destroy it, and to put an end to this nightmare. They were overjoyed, ecstatic that I had finally come to my senses. They saw this as a complete victory, a sign that they had broken me, silenced me, and brought me back under their control. What they didn't know was that this was all part of my plan. The meeting was a trap, a carefully orchestrated event that would expose their crimes to the world. I had invited the authorities, the media, and a select group of investors and employees, all of whom had been secretly informed of my family's wrongdoings. I had also hired a team of hackers to infiltrate Viridian's security system, to broadcast my evidence on every screen in the building, and to disable all communications, preventing them from escaping or covering up their tracks. As they sat around the mahogany conference table, smug and self-satisfied, I placed a thick file in front of them, the so-called evidence that I was supposedly handing over. They reached for it eagerly, their eyes gleaming with anticipation. But instead of the evidence they expected, they found a USB drive containing a single file, a video recording. My father, ever the impatient one, plugged the drive into the conference room's main display. The screen flickered, then filled with my face. "Hello, family," I began, my voice calm and steady. "I know you're all expecting me to hand over the evidence that could destroy you, but I decided that a more public forum was required." A look of confusion crossed their faces. Ethan shifted uneasily. My mother's eyes narrowed. "What is this, Layla?" my father demanded, his voice laced with suspicion. On cue, the screens throughout the Viridian building flickered again, this time displaying the same video. A collective gasp arose from the crowd gathered below. The faces of my family members morphed from smug satisfaction to utter horror. I continued, my voice echoing throughout the building. "What you are about to see is the truth. The truth about your lies, your deceit, and your crimes." The video then cut to a montage of damning evidence, recordings of their conversations, copies of their financial records, and testimonies from their victims. The truth, raw and undeniable, played out on every screen, exposing their dark secrets to the world. Panic erupted in the conference room. My father lunged for the USB drive, but it was too late. The evidence was out there, in the hands of the authorities, the media, and the public. Their empire was crumbling before their very eyes. Ethan started shouting, cursing my name, and threatening me with violence. My mother sat in stunned silence, her face pale and drawn, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and disbelief. Then, the doors to the conference room burst open, and the authorities flooded in. "Harper family," a stern voice boomed, "you're all under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy." As they were led away in handcuffs, their faces etched with shame and despair, I couldn't help but smile. My revenge was complete. I had taken everything from them just as they had taken everything from me. They had thought they were untouchable. They were wrong. As the police escorted them out, my father locked eyes with me. The hatred in his gaze was palpable, a venomous promise of retribution. It didn't matter, I had won, the game was over. But this was just the beginning of their nightmare. I had made sure of it, I knew this victory was just the opening act. The stage was set for their final fall. The news spread like wildfire. Viridian, once a symbol of wealth and prestige, was now synonymous with scandal and corruption. The media went into a frenzy, dissecting every detail of the story, interviewing victims, and exposing the Harpers' dirty secrets. The stock price plummeted, investors pulled out, and the company's assets were frozen. The empire my grandfather had built was reduced to ashes, a monument to their greed and their hubris. My parents and Ethan were denied bail, facing a long list of charges that carried hefty prison sentences. Their lawyers tried to negotiate a plea bargain, but the evidence was too overwhelming, the public outcry too intense. They were facing the consequences of their actions, stripped of their power, their wealth, and their freedom. But the legal ramifications were just the tip of the iceberg. The social fallout was even more devastating. They were ostracized by their friends, their colleagues, and even their own family. Their reputation was ruined, their name dragged through the mud. They became pariahs, symbols of greed and corruption, forever tainted by their crimes. Even their charitable foundations were exposed as elaborate tax evasion schemes, further tarnishing their image. I watched it all unfold from a distance, a sense of cold satisfaction washing over me. They were suffering, just as I had suffered. They were paying the price for their betrayal, their lies, and their greed. But I knew that my revenge wouldn't be complete until I had confronted them one last time, until I had looked them in the eye and told them how much they had hurt me. The opportunity came during their trial. I was called as a witness, to testify about their crimes and to provide evidence of their guilt. As I walked into the courtroom, I saw them sitting at the defendant's table, their faces pale and drawn, their eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and fear. They looked like shadows of their former selves, broken and defeated. I took the stand, swore to tell the truth, and began to recount my story. I spoke about their betrayal, their lies, and their greed. I described how they had manipulated me, used me, and discarded me like a broken toy. I revealed the details of their crimes, the shell corporations, the offshore accounts, the falsified documents. My voice was steady, unwavering, filled with a quiet strength that surprised even myself. As I spoke, I could see the anger and resentment in their eyes. They tried to interrupt me, to discredit me, to silence me. But the judge wouldn't allow it. He warned them to remain silent, to respect the court, and to allow me to tell my story. When I finished my testimony, I turned to face them, my eyes locking with theirs. "You took everything from me," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "You destroyed my life, my family, my dreams, but you didn't break me. I'm still here, stronger than ever, and I will not rest until you have paid for what you have done." my mother started to cry, her body shaking with sobs. Ethan glared at me, his fists clenched, his face contorted with rage. My father simply stared at me, his eyes empty, devoid of all emotion. The trial lasted for weeks, but the outcome was never in doubt. The evidence was too overwhelming, the witnesses too credible, the public outcry too intense. They were found guilty on all counts, sentenced to lengthy prison terms, and ordered to pay restitution to their victims. As they were led away in handcuffs, I watched them go, a sense of closure washing over me. Justice had been served. They had paid the price for their crimes. But my revenge didn't end there. I used my newfound platform to speak out against corporate greed and corruption. I started a foundation to help victims of fraud and abuse, providing them with legal assistance, financial support, and emotional counseling. I became a voice for the voiceless, a champion for the underdog, fighting for justice and equality. I reclaimed my life, my identity, and my future. I rebuilt my career, my relationships, and my self-esteem. I found love, happiness, and fulfillment. I proved to myself and to the world that I was more than just a victim. I was a survivor. Years later, I received a letter from my mother. She was in prison, serving her sentence, reflecting on her life and her mistakes. She apologized for her betrayal, her lies, and her greed. She admitted that she had been wrong, that she had let power and money corrupt her. She asked for my forgiveness, not for her sake, but for mine. I read the letter, tears streaming down my face. I realized that she was finally taking responsibility for her actions, that she was genuinely remorseful for the pain she had caused. I wrote back, telling her that I forgave her, not because she deserved it, but because I needed to let go of the anger and resentment that had consumed me for so long. Forgiveness wasn't about condoning their actions, it was about freeing myself from the prison of my own pain. I never saw them again. They lived out their days in shame and regret, haunted by their past, forever marked by their crimes. I moved on with my life, building a new future, a new identity, a new legacy. I became a successful businesswoman, a philanthropist, and a role model. I used my experiences to inspire others, to empower them, and to help them overcome their own challenges. I learned that revenge, while satisfying in the short term, is ultimately a hollow victory. It doesn't bring back what was lost, it doesn't heal the wounds of the past, and it doesn't fill the void in your heart. True healing comes from forgiveness, from acceptance, and from letting go. The day they betrayed me was the day revenge was born, but it was also the day I began to heal. It was the day I learned to forgive, to let go, and to move on. They lost everything. I just smiled. Revenge isn't sweet, it's necessary. Would you have done the same? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more justice.